South Wales, May 6th, 2001. 31-year-old Jason Williams hasn't been seen for 12 days.
And he certainly would have been in touch at least by phone.
Police arrest 2 men, secure witnesses, and obtain damning DNA evidence. But this is no open and shut case.
There was no body.
Could Jason still be alive? With the police unable to find him, his family turned to a local psychic. But will the hard science of the police or supernatural skills find Jason first? Lahore, a quiet commuter town on the south coast of Wales. A person doesn't have to be missing for very long before somebody notices. Unemployed father Jason Williams has not been seen for 4 days. His sister Julie is worried by his lack of contact.
Jason was a very family-orientated person, very devoted to his son. He was very much a hands-on dad. He certainly would have been in touch at least by phone to speak to his son. So that was when the alarm bells first were raised.
Detective Chief Inspector Ken Isaac has lived and worked in the area for most of his life. An area where serious crime is extremely rare.
The missing person report in relation to Jason Williams commenced in the village of Lahore. There were general house-to-house investigations and speaking to his family and associates. So we expected from the early stage of the missing person inquiry that he would be found within a week or so.
Most missing persons in the UK are found within 3 days. After a week, the police still have no definite leads. The family grows desperate.
Leaving messages on his mobile phone for him. Obviously, every time the phone rings, you wonder, is it the police ringing with news?
But everybody kept an open mind that perhaps he's gone visiting somebody out of the area.
After 9 days and with little information from the police, Julie takes advice from a relative and contacts psychic Sue Evans to see if her worst fears are true.
Psychics have the ability to speak to spirit, so that if that missing person is dead, then psychics would be able to communicate with that dead spirit.
If she was a genuine article and could do what she said she could do, she might come up with a piece of information that would lead to finding him, so there wasn't any decision to make, really.
Right then.
Sue claims that tarot cards focus her psychic intuition and will allow her to discover what happened to Jason.
I use the tarot like some people use a crystal ball or tea leaves. And it's a way of me linking into their lives and finding out what's happened to them. To me, the tarot is how I communicate with spirit, as well as being able to predict.
Out of the 78 picture cards, Sue turns over the image that most strikes fear into those not familiar with the tarot, the death card.
The death card means change. Doesn't always mean death, but it does mean change. But because it's next to the moon, which indicates sadness to me, it does mean that there is sad changes around you. This is the Chariot, which means trauma. This is how you feel at the minute, as if everything has tumbled down around you, which is caused by all these preceding cards. And this is the 9 of swords, which indicates stress to come along with this. The cards did show us that there was trauma around Jason, but we weren't absolutely positive as to what had happened. But it does indicate that something has happened. So we'll have to remote view this if you want at a later stage.
Usually if people have, as she put it, gone over, she can pick them up fairly quickly. But I think you are always aware as well that there are charlatans out there that will prey on people's grief and make claims that are not true.
You know, it's not going to be cut and dried. It's one of those situations that it may take a while to get to the bottom of.
Sue says she can sense a disturbance around Jason, but is unable to contact him in the spirit world. This is a ray of hope to Julie that her brother may not be dead after all. 12 days after his disappearance, Sue tries to contact Jason again. She figures that where one psychic has failed, 2 will succeed. She calls upon her sister Kathleen.
We're asking Spirit to help us to find what happened to Jason.
Sue uses remote viewing, an unproven phenomenon that psychics claim allows them to witness events from a spirit's point of view.
We ask for a protection and a gold light around us to help us work.
When I remote view, it's like watching a video or a television. You see details. You can see the layout of furniture. You can see the layout of rooms. You can pick up the atmosphere, which would lead up to a murder. You can then watch as if you're standing there as a witness.
Sue claims she is transported back to the murder scene with Jason as her spirit guide.
I found myself in a living room, and there was an older gentleman there and a younger gentleman, as well as Jason.
I see that there's a bit of agitation going on between Jason and the younger man.
What the psychic doesn't know is that her visions seem to match details revealed by a local man who has been brought in by police after claiming he witnessed the murder.
This started as a missing person investigation, and I always kept an open mind. Is this a missing person investigation, or is this a murder case?
Alan Sinfield says he was there when Jason was viciously attacked by 27-year-old Richard Davis.
Sinfield and Jason were friends. There was a vast age difference, some 20 years. What he told us is that they'd been drinking at his house. Davis and Williams had an argument over the fact that Davis saw Jodie Sinfield's telephone number in Jason Williams's phone.
All of a sudden it erupted like a balloon going pop. And there was a struggle.
Davis pulled Jason Williams onto the floor, straddled him.
And he was just sticking the knife in him in his chest and things in some kind of a vengeful, nasty way.
With no apparent knowledge of Sinfield's confession, Sue describes an older man and a younger man in the room with Jason, then a drunken murder. She has no doubts what this information is all about. Jason wants to ensure his killer is brought to justice.
There is an element of wanting justice done because somebody had taken his life.
It's 12 days since 31-year-old Jason Williams was last seen alive in Lahore, South Wales. This missing persons case takes a dramatic turn when a 57-year-old local man, Alan Sinfield, is interviewed by police.
This was turned into a murder investigation, primarily from the disclosure by Sinfield to the police saying that Richard Davis had killed Jason Williams, and he was a party to the disposal of his body.
For 24 hours, these details are not released even to Jason's family, yet somehow psychic Sue Evans' vision of the murder appears to match Sinfield's confession. The police remain open-minded over what has happened to Jason.
And we weren't sure at that stage, was he involved in the murder? Did he alone do the murder and blame Richard Davis? And they were things that we were hoping to clarify. Richard Davis was also arrested that night, and he was given an opportunity to give his version of events.
Davis protests his innocence and claims that although he had an argument with Jason, he left Sinfield's house with him still alive.
The interviewing officers felt it was a challenge, as if it was some type of game with him, or challenging the officers during each particular interview.
The police act fast and send in forensic teams to Sinfield's house. Now, both Ken Isaacs and Sue have terrible news to deliver.
One of the most difficult jobs for me was speaking to the family and telling them that he had been killed.
Initially, when we heard that he'd, been stabbed, it happened like probably 2 streets from where I lived. It was very strange to think that all that was going on in such a short distance from your home and you didn't know anything about it. We knew that these people had been charged with his murder, and I didn't feed that information to Sue, because if I did that, I would never be able to know whether she was genuine or not.
I have to tell you that I have been in contact with Jason's spirit. And I feel he has passed over. I'm sorry to have to tell you.
Sue tells Julie about her vision of Jason being in a room with two men and the drunken stabbing. Her details match the facts that the police have revealed to Julie earlier.
With regard to the information she's come up with, the accuracy of it, I can't logically tell you how she could come up with all those details.
Jason's spirit also seems to be providing Sue with more clues that could bring his killer to justice.
And Jason was pointing out that there would have been parts of the room splattered by the blood, and some had splattered onto a radiator.
With regard to the information she's come up with, the accuracy of it, I can't logically tell you how she could come up with all those details.
We need to see now what's happened to him since.
Julie is won over and approaches the police about working with the psychic, but they refuse the offer.
My take on the psychic involvement is that a psychic did not assist the investigation, and to my knowledge, Southwest Police has not used a psychic to help to prove any inquiry.
Yeah, I think, police have their hands tied by procedure, by budgets, by professional guidelines and standards. I mean, families are not tied by any of those things.
Frustrated by the police's response, Sue and Julie launch their own psychic hunt for the body, led by the spirit of Jason.
The key to any murder investigation is identifying where is the attack site and where is the body deposition site. We had an attack site, but we didn't initially have the body deposition site.
Without a body, the police could not be confident of convicting anyone for murder. At Sinfield's house, the forensic team have a breakthrough.
We moved back the carpet, and we found there was two large pools of blood, and under the radiator were some small dots of blood.
Sue claims she predicted there would be blood close to a radiator. For her believers, this is proof that the psychic has access to the world of the paranormal. Psychometry is a controversial technique that supposedly allows seers to explore psychic imprints of objects touched by victims. Will this help Sue find Jason's body? She calls in her psychic troops.
Deep breath in.
We were asked to sit within the circle, and then I think a photograph and some things of Jason's, like a T-shirt, were passed around.
It helps when you have more people in circle, because each person's got a different psychic ability. So all these combined builds up the whole picture. So we saw that the body had been loaded into a van and taken up towards the Brecon Beacons. We saw the body being left very unceremoniously, but there was a tree the branch of a tree had broke.
Are we anywhere near where your body is?
Jason showed us a Celtic cross. The unique thing about it is that he said there were 3 of these crosses.
And she said, this is near the spot where he was put.
I just keep saying it's so obvious. You're missing me.
Near there, that's where his body was.
South Wales, May 2001. The race to find the body of murder victim Jason Williams is on. Police detain 2 local men, Alan Sinfield and Richard Davis. Sinfield has pointed the finger at Davis, but he maintains his innocence. Whatever they say may be irrelevant. DCI Ken Isaac knows that without Jason's body, a murder conviction is practically impossible.
It was important for us to recover Jason's body for 2 reasons. Primarily, to prove the case of murder. There's been very few convictions or murder convictions where a body hasn't been recovered. And secondly, for the family, so they could have closure on the case.
At the same time, psychic Sue Evans has launched her own search. She claims that she is in touch with the spirit of Jason, and he has given her clues that will lead to the location of his body.
Where we were in terms of the jigsaw at this stage was that we had more pieces to put together to build the whole picture. We needed to know where the body might be to help find Jason.
Jason's sister is convinced by Sue's powers and asks the police to use her supernatural skills. But in the UK, busy murder investigation teams often discount the work of psychics. While Sue and Julie embark on their own hunt for more clues, the police act upon Sinfield's admission that he helped Davis dispose of the body.
Following Richard Davis killing Jason Williams, they wrapped his body up in black plastic bags. And he and Sinfield went around the Brecon Beacons looking for a place to dispose of Jason's body.
Assigned this near impossible task of finding Jason's body in over 500 square miles of moorland is search expert John Williams.
The area is so big. Unless we had sort of some indication as to where Jason was, then we were literally clutching at straws.
What the police have that Sue doesn't is the help of one of the men who dumped Jason's body.
We drove quite a few hundred miles over the days I was with him. I can recall him saying that they drove onto a grass verge at some point. And on my left-hand side, I could see some tyre marks that were on the grass verge. I looked further along the road from where the tyre marks were, and I could see a white bag. On top of the bag, there was a stone. And it just seemed strange. This was in the middle of nowhere. There was absolutely nothing about, and why is a stone suddenly been put on top of a carrier bag?
Sue's psychic investigation has already shown her Jason's body dumped on the Brecon Beacons. Will her visions of Celtic crosses and a broken tree turn out to be meaningful?
The first thing I saw at this point, I could see that this area was flattened, and that was quite obvious. You could then see the tree trunk here, and you could see that some bark was removed from the main sort of trunk area. It just looked as if somebody put their foot in it. I was more than satisfied that this was a scene, more than satisfied.
As Sue predicted, it seems that Jason has been dumped near a broken tree. Now police meticulously search for his body or further evidence.
It was literally a shoulder-to-shoulder, slow-time search from the roadway into where I felt Jason was placed.
We'd heard that they'd actually sealed off an area in Brecon and forensic teams were searching it.
For 12 hours, police search experts painstakingly examine an area that is almost the size of a football pitch. Miraculously, they discover a human hair.
He came up trumps because his hair was found interwoven with grass and bracken. For that particular scene, to find his hair was fantastic.
I think at that point we were hoping that they would find him.
The hair is sent off for DNA testing to secure a match with Jason. After 24 hours of searching, the police are forced to acknowledge the worst.
There was no body. I carried a cursory search, but there was no body.
It was quite frustrating, really, when they came away empty-handed.
Amazingly, Sue's vision of the broken tree has turned out to be accurate, but somebody has been back to the site and Jason's body is gone. Without it, a murder conviction is a near impossible task for the police. Over the following months, the police scour the Brecon Beacons using helicopters, dive teams, and sniffer dogs, every method available to them, except the powers of a psychic. Julie believes that where the police have failed, Sue will succeed.
I feel it's definitely near these 3 Celtic crosses. So we decided to go in the car and go up and have a look for ourselves to see if we could find any of these landmarks that Jason was showing us.
As we were driving along, we rounded a corner and I spotted a church behind some high sort of conifer trees.
And we found a Celtic cross. There was a Celtic cross there.
And as we approached it, I noticed that I could just see a Celtic cross in the grounds, and I said to Sue, "There's one Celtic cross there."
Julie turned on and said, "Look behind," and there was 2 other Celtic crosses. So these were the 3 Celtic crosses we felt that Jason was showing us. The clues and the jigsaws were coming together, and we just had to trust that he'd guide us to him.
In South Wales, 2 very different investigations race to find the body of murder victim Jason Williams. The police search the Brecon Beacons but find no corpse. Jason's sister Julie turns to psychic Sue Evans. She is certain that Jason will be found near the 3 Celtic crosses that they have discovered in an old Welsh churchyard.
The fact that we actually found 3 Celtic crosses in one churchyard, which I think is quite unusual anyway.
You could feel his spirit around you, and you would feel a nice warmth.
I've thought about it, and I really can't think how logically she could come up with as much accurate information as she has.
I would never have known these were here, and I do feel that Jason did draw us towards these to show he's in this area.
Sue is certain that Jason is nearby. Julie supplies the police with the psychic's vision, but they prefer not to act on information allegedly from beyond the grave.
So I'm used to them being skeptical. I'm used to not being acknowledged by some of them, even when what I've set out to do has happened. But I feel Julie did feel a lot of frustration because she'd be going there and saying, well, look, we're doing this, we're doing that, why aren't you helping?
The police have the confession of Sinfield and strong evidence pointing towards Davis as the murderer. But without Jason's body, taking Davis to court is risky. A conviction secured without a body is virtually unprecedented.
My understanding that there's been less than a dozen convictions in British judicial history, or it was at that stage, for a conviction of murder without a body. So we were mindful of that.
The police meticulously piece together a package that aims to prove that Jason is dead even without his body. It includes vital information from the crime scene.
We got an interpretation to the blood. There was a large pool of blood, so anyone who would have lost that amount of blood would have been seriously ill at that particular time. So that helped to support the fact that Jason Williams didn't leave the scene that night.
The hair discovered in the forest comes back with a DNA match with Jason. What Sinfield was saying all along seems to be true. Then detectives interview Davy's girlfriend, Jody Sinfield, and she confirms that he admits to stabbing Jason. The police decide to gamble on the skills of their forensic team, and in February 2002, Davis and Sinfield are put in front of a court of law. Sue's claims that she has spoken to the spirit world will also be put to the test.
It was spooky, for want of a better word. As I say, when certain things were coming up, you could actually feel the hairs on the back of your neck going up.
Julie claims that Sue continued to provide her family with visions of the murder, including details of the part that Davis played, the nature of the attack, and how Jason's body was moved. Now this information corresponds with what Julie hears in court.
They realised that a lot of the information that I'd given them was accurate, bang on. This proved that I was on the right track all the way through. Julie did go back to see the police and say, well, Sue had told us all this before it came out, and yet you still refused to let her in on this.
The thorough police investigation leaves no room for doubt. Sinfield gets 2 years for perverting the course of justice. Richard Davis is found guilty of Jason Williams' murder and sentenced to life. He continues to appeal against this judgment.
We were satisfied and pleased, obviously, with the fact that we had done a thorough investigation. But my thoughts are with the family of Jason Williams.
It's over 4 years since the trial. Jason still has no grave. His grieving family can only pay their respects at a memorial near the site where he was originally dumped.
Jason seems to have accepted things a lot better as the years have gone on. He seems to have a little bit more acceptance of what's happened to him, but the drive is just as strong. He still wants us to find his body. He's still around us, and he is only a thought away, and he pops into my mind quite often, quite regular.
Sue is certain that Jason is near the 3 crosses, and with police help she could find his body, but the controversy over the intervention of psychics and clairvoyants in criminal investigations remains.
Well, I feel that psychics are another tool that the police can use. I would like to see every police headquarters having psychics on their books.
It's nice to see Callum's dog is still here.
Oh, bless.
Yes, Callum's little dog. Because obviously he
No,
has no
bless.
grave to go to.
No. It's a little present for his father.
I think she's been psychic from a child. To her, that is normal, and I get the impression she can't understand why we find it so amazing, because for her, it's fact.
Sue's relationship with Jason has had a lasting effect on her.
It proves that there's life after death, and it proves that your loved ones care for you after they've died, and that they still have emotions and feelings even though they're dead. I will always keep looking for him, and I will always be there for him for as long as I can.
November 1982. Fear cloaks the serenity of a small town in New Jersey. Popular teenager Amy Hoffman has disappeared without a trace. The police can't say if she's alive or dead, but psychic Nancy Weber knows there's been a murder and fears the killer is on a rampage.
He's killed before, he's killing again. He's going to kill more.
She tells me something, I believe it to be gospel.
Can Nancy help catch the killer before his brutality is unleashed again? Three people out for a pleasant afternoon stroll, or so it seems. A closer look, and it becomes apparent this is not a recreational time filler. These people are not so ordinary. The conversation underscores the seriousness of their purpose.
She's screaming for her life and begging mercy.
Right when she was first found, there was no evidence that would indicate a...
Bill Hughes is a police officer, Nancy Weber is a professional psychic, and Jimmy Moore is retired. He was detective captain at the Parsippany Police Department. More than 20 years ago, the trio came together and stood in this secluded location. What happened here would change their lives forever. November 23rd, 1982. Amy Hoffman, an 18-year-old senior high school student, leaves her part-time job at a Morris County shopping mall. In the parking lot, she says goodnight to her friend. It's approximately 9:35 p.m. Two people see Amy as she walks across the back lot to where her car is parked. One, a fellow worker driving out of the parking lot. The other, her killer.
Well, her vehicle was found in the parking lot, not too far away from the store that she worked in. And the door was open on the car, and there was a witness, and she noticed a white male, in a green Chevrolet that was parked a couple spots away from where Amy's car was. And he was just sitting there in the car at that time.
It's Thanksgiving, 2 days since Amy Hoffman was last seen alive. Morris County, New Jersey comprises several small townships. Police departments from across the region become involved in the search for Amy.
It had a major impact on the community. Women were hesitant about going out on their own, especially at night.
20 miles away in Mount Olive, Nancy Weber, who runs her own psychic practice, gets a phone call from a woman.
She said, my daughter has a best friend who works at the Morris County Mall. And she's missing. She didn't come home. And that's when the vision popped up. The image I kept having was this naked body, multiple wounds all over. She was lying in water, raped. She had been terribly, terribly violated before she was murdered. And so I just went right into saying to her, I am sorry. I really can't discuss this with you. You call Amy's parents, or you call the police that are involved.
That same day, Amy Hoffman's body was found in a retention tank at the reservoir in Randolph.
There was a couple walking their dog through the woods, and it's an isolated area. It's like a lover's lane area. And they came across the body floating in the water. There was numerous slashes and stab wounds to her body, and some were post-mortem, meaning that after she had died, the assailant still continued to slash at her and cut her body. It was pretty gruesome.
Nancy's vision of the dead young woman was accurate. Bill Hughes, a detective with the Mount Olive Police Department, happened to drop by Nancy's house.
Most of the police officers in Mount Olive Township knew Nancy because she was just a friend of a lot of guys on the force, her and her family. And I stopped by Nancy's house just for a cup of coffee.
By the way, I read the newspaper account of Amy Hoffman. Why are they lying? She was raped. She wasn't not sexually abused. She was mutilated, not no wounds obvious.
The investigators at the time did not believe that sexual assault had occurred, but Nancy said that it had, that the girl had been sexually assaulted. There was no way of knowing because there was no physical evidence that you could see at the scene, according to the investigators, to indicate any type of sexual contact. What we found out later on was, yes, she indeed had been sexually assaulted by the suspect, and that was the result of forensics taken by the medical examiner's office.
I didn't say anything to Bill about wanting to be involved at all. It's one of the things I don't ever do. I wait to be asked. When it comes to this kind of work, it's very important, I believe, for all concerned, including the victim, to know that I am the appropriate person to participate. It's an ingredient. I'm one of the ingredients or not. So I don't ask to help.
Maybe to a lesser extent today, but at that time, psychics were certainly not taken seriously. They probably were looked at as people trying to make a name for themselves, people that would take advantage of the weak. I was a small player in this investigation. I'm on the periphery, so I really had no authority. I had to find somebody that was very open-minded, kind of like myself. You know, I'll try anything once, believe anything once until it's proven wrong.
Detective Bill Hughes has faith in Nancy's psychic powers, and she has a real concern that the killer will strike again.
He's killed before, he's killing again, he's going to kill more.
November 1982, Morris County, New Jersey. 18-year-old student Amy Hoffman goes missing. 2 days later, her mutilated body is discovered in a water retention tank. Police from all across the region are hunting down a brutal killer. On the same day Amy's body is discovered, psychic Nancy Weber has a vision of the crime scene. She knows that the young woman has been sexually assaulted and murdered even before police. Now she suspects the killer will strike again. She's right.
The second victim was a girl named Deidre O'Brien, who worked in a local restaurant and was heading home early in the morning. It was after midnight. She was forced off the road and abducted from her vehicle, and later brought to a rest stop on Route 80 in Warren Township, where she was murdered. We were all very upset because now we had two gruesome homicides on our hands, and we had a feeling that the same individual was involved because the same type vehicle was seen leaving the scene of Deidre O'Brien's homicide.
A second woman dead in such a short time leaves little doubt that police are dealing with a serial killer. But this time, the killer leaves a calling card: tire prints. Detective Bill Hughes thinks it's crucial to get Nancy officially involved in the case. But he is just one of hundreds of police officers tracking down what they now suspect is a serial killer. He needs to get someone he can trust to hear her out.
I knew that Jimmy Moore is a seasoned veteran. Jimmy has well over 20 years on the police force at the time. He's a captain. He's in charge of the detectives in Parsippany. He's more directly involved in the case because Amy Hoffman is from Parsippany. So I knew that if I could talk to Jim, then I might be able to get them to use Nancy to do some investigative leads on the case or to give us some direction to go in the case.
I had never used a psychic, and I was a little skeptical. I really didn't believe too much into them. Is it possible? I mean, can somebody truly do this? I actually had flashbacks of being on the boardwalk and down at the Jersey Shore, and you see these signs, palm readings, and of course I don't believe in any of that. So I was a little skeptical, but I said, you know what? We have nothing really to go with. If there's a chance that it's going to solve the case, I'm willing to try it.
When I opened the door to Bill at 6'5", standing next to this about 5'7" man who he introduces as Captain Jimmy Moore from Homicide, I thought, uh-oh, what now? And he simply asked me to repeat to Jimmy what I had told him about the newspaper account of Amy Hoffman and my belief that there was a discrepancy there.
I asked Nancy some questions and stuff like that, and pretty much wanted to get to know her as an individual. And I found out that she was just down-to-earth type of individual, and she didn't seem to be a person that exaggerates or puts anything on. And I was impressed by her personality. And I said, how do you do this? And she says, I just see it. And she says, I don't know why or how, but I just see things. And she says, all I can do is tell you what I see. And she says, I don't want you to tell me anything about the case, and I don't want you to give me any leads.
What we decided to do at that point was take a ride in my car. And what we were going to do is take Nancy, by the scenes of the abduction, and the scenes of the murder, and the scenes where their bodies were left.
When I was driving with Bill and Jimmy in the car the first day, when we went down a road, I could feel I was coming towards the end of her life. It was as if the energy of the road itself got darker and darker. Got more magnetically charged with an energy that felt more panicky, heightened anxiety.
The first place that we went to was the reservoir in Randolph. We took Nancy down there and parked the cars, and we let Nancy walk around. It was an eerie feeling. You know, it was a very isolated area, wooded area, no homes around. Very macabre. You could almost feel the horror that Amy would have gone through. Amy could have been dumped in any one of about 12 acres. And Nancy went right to the spot where Amy was left.
I felt almost as if Amy was waiting for me there on the ground. So I got down on the ground on my knees, and I could feel no separation between the memory of what Amy went through and myself at that point. I began to speak words I believed were the last words, where she was begging, please don't kill me. I believe she knew that that's what he was about by then. She had already been raped. She had already been badly cut. And I believe she understood that he was enjoying this. And she didn't know how to get through to him. She had no idea how to get through to this person who seemed bent on destroying her. For me, it was very important to stay with it because I'm looking for the tiniest bit of a clue, a shred of evidence that might stop him. Went back in the car and kept reviewing. Now I'm going over all the film. Again and again, like an editor, attempting to be as detailed as possible. Pop. He's from Polish descent. He grew up in Morristown. Pop. He was in Florida. He was in jail there. for murder. And I'm telling Jimmy and Bill as I get it, in the car, driving. They let him out. Early parole? Pop, his name kept coming to me, the man who was with her. James. I don't know if she knew his name. I knew it. So when I got the last name beginning with a K and Koedatich.
I felt that Nancy was seeing what we were looking for. She had this individual pegged, and she was trying as hard as she could to give us as much evidence that she could see to arrest him, because she kept telling me, Jim says, this guy is sick, and he's just going to keep killing until he's caught. And she was upset with that. She was very adamant about telling me that this was a sick individual and he's just going to keep on killing.
It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't he stalked this particular person for weeks and had an obsession with her. He had an obsession with joy at causing harm. When I saw that, I knew he's not going to stop until somebody stops him. This man will not stop.
With 2 brutal murders occurring within 10 days, every available police officer in Morris County is on the case. Most are following procedure, the routine that is police work. 2 are following a totally different line of inquiry. Detectives Jimmy Moore and Bill Hughes have teamed up with psychic Nancy Weber in their own private investigation. They've been able to get quite a bit of information from Nancy about the first murder. Now they want to know what she can tell them about the second.
After the Deidre O'Brien homicide, I picked up Nancy and we drove to the rest area where the crime had taken place.
She took us right to the spot where the suspect had parked with Deidre. She described the encounter there.
And I see this truck in my mind. And I see a trucker and I see this woman coming out of a speeding car. She's naked, she's knifed. And I'm looking at the car and I'm looking at it. It's the same car, it's James. I know it.
The only thing that stopped him from continuing with his attempt to sexually assault her was the fact that there was a truck parked in the rest area a little ahead of them.
Nancy felt that the assailant had just had enough and didn't want to be bothered with her anymore, so he stabbed her and threw her out of the car and then drove off. And that's when Deidre had enough strength to pick herself up and go to the truck to knock on the door, getting help from the truck driver.
The truck driver got on the CB radio and radioed for help, and troopers eventually got there, but unfortunately, Deidre passed away in the arms of the truck driver.
I was impressed with Nancy when I took her to the truck stop, because everything that she was telling me was exactly what had happened, as much as we knew from the evidence and from the truck driver's statement.
She's telling us stuff that there's no way Nancy could have known, because this is, you know, in the investigative files. This is not stuff that's being released to the press. And yet, Nancy knows what happened.
Over the next few days, Nancy keeps replaying the visions over in her head.
Every time I would go back to James, I would get another tiny little piece. He was at least about 5'10", slim, very narrow, thin, long nose, dark eyes. And I'd spend hours on it. I would be reviewing it, kind of like 18-hour days of review editing. Then I'd go back some more, and I'd feel the car, his brother, gas station. Brother owns it, works it. That's where he got the car, from his brother at a gas station. They're local. They're Wharton, they're Morristown, they're local. They all know who he is. Everybody knows who he is. They'll know his last name. He was a local terror. Growing up even, the cops all know who he is. He's not an unfamiliar character. This guy was dangerous when he was in high school.
Nancy's coming up with all this stuff that she couldn't have possibly known about, and she's given us all this good information. And then a little bit of frustration sets in because you believe what she's saying, and now you're trying to think to yourself, how am I going to convince the bosses in Morris County to listen to what she has to say?
At this stage, the detectives want permission from the county prosecutor to officially involve Nancy in the investigation, but before they can present their case, they are denied access to his office. The prosecutor is not interested.
As Nancy and I started to walk through the door, a detective from the prosecutor's office stopped me, and who knew me personally, and he said, "Jim, what's she doing here?" I said, "Well, she's been with us and giving us information on the case." And he said, "Well, the prosecutor doesn't want her here. He doesn't want to get involved with her." I was upset with the prosecutor for not even hearing us out. I felt that he should have at least listened to what we had to say. And it bothered me. To this day, it bothers me why he did that.
The headlines were all over not only our state, but the nation and on all the news, that we had a serial killer. Nobody knew who it was. They couldn't figure it out.
Nancy is also upset and frustrated. She decides to appeal to a higher authority. She calls some students who she trusts, and they form a psychic circle. Together, they use psychic prayer to try and stop the killer in his tracks.
Went through everything. And when I was finished, I told them, join hands with me. So we went to the light, went to the Godhead, went to the apex, and through that, asked that if it was in the spiritual path of all concerned, to bring back to James Koedatich the pain he has given and the suffering he has caused. Let him feel it now. Let him get it in such a manner he can no longer give it. And I simply held on to that thought the rest of the night. It was my mantra. It was my chant. It is his time. Let him feel his own pain. He cannot give it out any longer. Let him feel his own pain. He cannot give it out any longer. It is over.
The power of divine intervention has been argued and disputed since time began. Can a New Jersey psychic's prayer really stop the killer in his tracks? In fact, there's been a dramatic break in the case overnight.
I get a call home, and I was told that an individual was arrested in response to the Amy Hoffman, Deidre O'Brien murders. They responded to a home in Morristown where an individual had been stabbed. While they were at the scene, one of the officers noticed the green Chevrolet sitting in the driveway, and it matched the description of the vehicle we were looking for. So they called for the forensic team to come to the scene to check this vehicle out. As it turned out, they found the tire on the car matched the imprint that was found at Deidre O'Brien's abduction. And subsequently, the individual was arrested and charged with the 2 homicides. When I found out who the individual was and his background, I couldn't believe how accurate Nancy's information was that she had given us.
So we have our guy under arrest, James Koedatich, and what we find out about James is very interesting. A lot of the stuff that Nancy had told us was right on the money. James Koedatich had a brother who was a mechanic, had lived pretty much his entire life in Morris County. James had moved to Florida, had been in prison in Florida, and that he'd murdered while he was in prison in Florida, stuff that Nancy had come up with. His last name was Koedatich, the K and the ITCH that Nancy had come up with.
Early in the morning, I get a call from Jimmy, and he goes, "Hey, Nancy, what did you do?" I said, "What do you mean, what did I do?" He said, "What did you do?" I said, "I had class last night." And I told them about it. And we said a prayer to finish it. Make this man have all the pain he gave to women. He said, "Well, James Koedatich," and as he said the words and the name, it was like, boom, 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 lights go on. I went, "That's him."
All the information that she saw, that she gave us, was exactly the truth.
I think that a lot of people have to see for themselves. You know, there's going to be people that are going to watch this episode and they're going to see me and they're going to listen to me talk. They're going to listen to Jimmy Moore talk. They're going to listen to different people talking about their experiences with psychics, and they're just not going to buy it. and so be it. But if you're a police officer and you don't buy it, then you probably shouldn't be in the investigative side of anything. I says, because like I said before, you've got to keep an open mind. You've got to be willing to try anything. If you try it and you don't like it and it doesn't work out for you, so be it. Then don't try it again if you don't want to, but at least try it once.
But there is still a mystery surrounding the event of James Koedatich's arrest. Police arrived at his house after he called them complaining he'd been stabbed. Could Nancy's prayer have anything to do with this?
He claimed that a dark-haired woman ran him off the road and knifed him in the back. And at the time, my hair wasn't gray, and it was longish. And I thought, I wonder if he'd recognize me if he met me. I'd love it. I'd love him to know that, you know, you stand there with all the victims. And that victims have power, you fool. How could you do this?
It's up to you to decide whether she had anything to do with it or not.
On October 29, 1984, James Koedatich became the first man sentenced to die under New Jersey's revised capital punishment statute. The sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. After his arrest, it was determined that Koedatich had actually stabbed himself. He never explained why, although the self-inflicted wounds were not life-threatening, and apparently he never again spoke of the long-haired woman he claimed had attacked him. But perhaps he sees her now and then. July 1973, New Haven, Connecticut. In broad daylight, a young woman is brutally murdered in a downtown parking garage. Witnesses see the suspect escape. Forensics discover a trail of evidence, including blood and fingerprints. But it's not enough to capture the killer. Police turn to the world of the paranormal to help solve the case. A psychic's cryptic clues create more questions than answers. But will they catch the murderer and bring solace to a town cloaked in fear? July 16, 1973, New Haven, Connecticut. Penny Serra is a 21-year-old dental assistant. In her high school yearbook, she describes herself as having a laughing heart and merry spirit. Since her mother passed away 10 years earlier, she's been a constant support to her father and young sister. On this day, she's taken time off work to go shopping for furniture. She pulls in on the top floor of Temple Street parking garage. She gets out, and before there's time to lock the car, she's attacked. In the struggle, the attacker's hand is cut. The young woman manages to escape to a stairwell, but her assailant corners her and stabs her through the heart. As far as Detective George Mazzacane was concerned, this case was going to be a piece of cake.
We had 5 people who had witnessed the portions of the incident as it occurred. We had the blood type. We had fingerprints. We had everything but his name and address.
Police even had a suspect, Penny's on-off boyfriend. Within hours of the murder, the man is brought in for questioning, and an eyewitness picks him out of a lineup.
However, he had an ironclad alibi. He had in excess of 12 witnesses who put him in a restaurant at a grill cooking.
With the release of the boyfriend, Mazzacane drew his own conclusion.
It was a random assault. and that this individual probably had a criminal record.
If Mazzacane is right, and it was a random act of violence, then there's little hope of a quick conviction. Meanwhile, the forensics team scour Penny's car for clues. Although the technology was pretty basic back in the 70s, they uncover a wealth of evidence.
There was a tissue box on the back seat, and there was a fingerprint on the tissue box. And then we found a handkerchief with the same blood on it, same type blood. Aside from the blood, there was Freon, which is used as a propellant in spray paint and auto body. And there was mechanics grease.
Freon, spray paint, and grease. It doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to figure it out. This is someone who gets his hands dirty working with cars. Mazzacane checks out hundreds of local mechanics, but he can't match the fingerprint. Overnight, New Haven becomes a ghost town. Women are afraid to go anywhere alone. Weeks turn into months. Live leads become dead ends. Mazzacane is frustrated and getting desperate. He makes a decision that most people might consider highly unusual. He decides to bring a psychic on board.
When you got to a point where an investigation becomes dead and you want to jumpstart it, you certainly would revert to a psychic.
Mazzacane gets in touch with Mary Pasquarella Downey, a psychic and time walker. She brings a new dimension to the investigation. For most people, the notion of time is just that, a notion, a means of measuring fragments of our lives. For Mary, time is personified, and she can talk to it.
When I discuss time as a time walker, time surrounds us, past, present, and future. You can't change time. You can move it around and play with it, but you can't change it. But the present past is something that's available. It's like a large library. If I'm dealing with time, it's like you pick a string up and then you begin to wind it like a ball. And the more you wind it, the larger the ball gets and the more information you compile. Time is like a moving camera. It takes pictures and retains things. And if you listen very carefully, time is like a verbal library. It gives you information. It defines things for you. Somebody asked me once what my impression was of time. And my impression of time is it's like a large ocean with lots of thought patterns that are boats floating in it. And if you really want to deal with it, you swim out to the boat, climb aboard, and gain whatever information you can get from that little boat. If I get an impression from time of a face, I'll draw a face.
Mary's drawing is similar to an eyewitness description of the killer, but it's not enough to nail him. She does, however, provide some important but cryptic clues.
I just knew blue was extremely important to the case because it kept repeating itself. It says blue is important. Blue is important.
Blue. I said, what does blue tell me? Blue? Well, let's think about this. I'm talking to myself. The car was blue. The incident occurred on the 8th and 10th level. Is there any blue up there? No. What does blue tell me? Was he wearing blue clothes? Did he have blue shoes on or a blue hat? No. Okay, so we'll file that. Blue.
Sure, the car was blue, and Penny's dress was blue, but it doesn't identify the killer.
I got the odor of oil, or like you would smell in a garage. So I tied that to the person and said to myself, oh, this must be somebody that's a mechanic.
Amazingly, Mary had picked up on the mechanic connection. The fact that Mazzacane had been pursuing the possibility that a mechanic was involved had never been released to the public. And then the psychic provided a third cryptic clue.
Water kept repeating itself, and I thought to myself, well, this is New Haven. It's a harbor. You're surrounded by water. At that point, I thought, well, water's important to tell me that it happened here in New Haven. And I let it go at that.
Another non-starter. Doesn't every psychic see water?
I said, this is frustrating. She says, well, I can't tell you anything. I guess I was looking for some kind of an answer to the crime, to put me on, and she said, no, I don't do that.
Mary wouldn't be able to provide the detective with the kind of answers that he was looking for, but she did have insight into the problems with the case.
But I did say blood would tell, that the case would not be solved for years and years and years because the person was somebody that would just slip, very ordinary, and slip right through the cracks. And so it would be years before, but don't give up because blood would tell. I had no idea what that sentence meant at that time.
I said, do I have to wait for this guy to commit a crime? And then we go back to work? And she said, no, it's not going to be like that. She said, it's going to be a long time from now. So I said, oh, that's not very encouraging to myself, you know? No, I've got to prove her wrong or discard all her information or comments at that point.
It looked like the case would never be solved, but there was one man who was determined not to let that happen. Detective George Mezzacane was hunting down the brutal killer of Penny Serra. When he reached a dead end, he sought the help of professional psychic Mary Pasquarella Downey. Mary insisted that the killer would eventually be caught, but the visual clues she provided were vague. The color blue and a sense of water were not hard evidence. Certainly not something he'd want to share with his superiors.
I never committed this to writing because it would look like nonsense. And then one time I mentioned something in the detective division to someone, and the chief inspector said to me, you're not reading tea leaves anymore, are you? He said, I said, no. He said, well, when you get through with that, he says, I want you to go out and take care of something, get back to doing good old-fashioned police work.
Mezzacane decided to ignore the ridicule of his superior and continue working with Mary for two reasons. Firstly, conventional police work had yielded no positive results. Secondly, he was under pressure from Penny's father, John.
She said, I want to get more information on Penny. I want to hold one of her objects. Did you bring anything with you? I said, no. She said, well, I need some significant part of clothing. The dress she wore that day. I said, I'll get something. So I went back after this was a brief conversation. And I was interested, but I wasn't, I didn't have anything to chew on, you know? It was like, you know, like a light beer, I guess. Everything you wanted and less, you know? I guess they'd have to characterize it that way, you know? There's a lot there, but... And I wasn't surprised. I was interested.
For their second meeting, Mezzacane brought Penny's father along. John Serra had campaigned to keep this case alive from day one. Every week, he placed ads in local papers in an attempt to find the killer.
He did not want it put on the shelf and wait 20 years for someone to come in and confess to a crime. He wanted to know that there was somebody working on this case every day. And that was his mission, and he accomplished that.
Mezzacane also brought a favorite coat of Penny's. The process of psychic reading through an object is known as psychometry.
When you walk into a house, you either get a good feeling or a bad feeling. When you meet somebody, you either like them or you're wary of them. That's your energy reaching out to protect you. And it's exactly the same as any viewer that's out there has had the deja vu, that's met somebody and been cautious, that's gone into a house and couldn't wait to get out. This is psychometry. That's the world of psychometry. It's energy speaking.
She began to talk about Penny and what kind of a woman she was and what she thought had happened, and kind of recapped what she had told me.
The only thing that we did get from that was that I knew very well that it was somebody that had never seen her before, had nothing to do with them, with her, and that it was just a chance occurrence. Wrong place, wrong time.
Mazzicane's suspicions are confirmed. Right from the start, he also felt the killing was random. After the session, Mazzicane and Penny's father had their own meeting.
I said, what do you think after we left? I said, did you feel comfortable? Did you think she's a quack? Where did she get all this information? How did she? He says, I don't know. He said, but she's good. He said, I believe her. He said, if she can help, I'd like her involved. So I said, okay. She had suggested that she wanted to go to the crime scene and get some impressions of the person who did this. So he was all for that. He said, sure. And I thought it was a good idea. We'd come this far. Why leave that part undone?
It's been over a year since Penny Serra was murdered. Conventional police work has produced nothing. Out of sheer desperation, Mazzicane continues to put his faith in Mary.
And this is actually where it happened?
Yes, right in this area here was where she bolted from the car and ran.
Can this odd couple manage to grasp some psychic evidence from the crime scene and not only capture a brutal killer, but bring some solace to a heartbroken father?
What witnesses said, he chased her up this way and then she ran. She was looking around. She said, I've got a terrible headache. She says, I'm getting an awful headache on this side. I said to myself, what has that got to do with anything? Where's that going to lead me? Why was she getting a headache in the area where this guy was standing, where he was observed? Is there a logical explanation for that?
When we got to the garage, the perpetrator began to become more clear to me as far as what he was like and who he was. So basically, I saw him in a uniform. I smelled the gas. I knew that he worked with a garage. I saw him wiping his hands on an oily rag. And I saw a uniform with a name tag with the letter E on it. And I knew that he worked in a garage. He was probably a mechanic. He was thin. He was wiry. He weighed maybe 160, 65 pounds tops. And that he had the injury to his head.
I mean, that's a lot to digest and sleep on. I mean, you'd be talking in your sleep if you got hit with all that at once.
For Mazzicane, returning to the crime scene raises more questions than answers.
My primary questions were what actually did happen and what really was in this man's mind at the time of this murder. And that's what this revisiting stirs in me.
While we were in the garage, one of the things that was you were very aware of is that you're dealing with a girl that was very lovely. Penny Serra was like a little rainbow. She reminds me so much of one of my children. Logical, reasonable, common sense, sweet and understanding. You could picture her fighting to stay alive. That was the one thing that really began to get to me, is I knew she fought to stay alive. And that really disturbed me. And I wondered why hadn't anybody heard her, because I know she would have cried out.
I don't want to make this sound like I had a religious experience. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. It was just a feeling that I had. I felt that she was getting information from a gift that she had. And I never felt that with another person in my life before, and I've worked with some psychics before, and I've worked with some after, and I never got that feeling, you know, that I was going to help, or I was going to get that kind of, you know, it never happened again.
From the very onset of getting the case, I knew that blue was extremely important. Blue, 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 kept repeating. And then as we approached the garage, I knew that where we were going would be the blue floor. So as we entered the garage and George was driving up, I noted that there were numbers on the floor. So I thought I was wrong.
Later on, I checked with one of the attendants, and he did say that years ago, they did color code the floors, but then they changed it to a numeric format.
So I was right.
So she was right.
So I was right,
Yeah.
and then it was blue.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Another confirmation.
I had the feeling that this woman knew something, and I honestly thought that she was going to tell me who did it. Go get this guy. Here's his name. I wrote it down and his address. It was scary in that someone could know that kind of information and not have enough to take you over the top. That was frustrating.
Mary's visit to the parking garage had produced several new clues. However, every psychic has their limit.
I'm not involved beyond the point of my first initial investigation. There are a lot of psychics that have the same philosophy that I have, that we are not going to solve a murder case. We are not police. We are going to be an informant, somebody that informs them of something that that they may have missed or not paid attention to. A good psychic will only do what they're asked to do and nothing more, and walk away.
Detective Mazzacane continues working on the Penny Serra case. Years pass with no significant progress. Then, in 1979, Mazzacane decides that he too has reached his limit. After 17 years with the New Haven Police Department, the detective retires.
I just hit a stone wall, I think. I just hit the wall. And I was getting totally consumed with this. And Mary had given me all these leads, but I needed something to put everything together, and I just couldn't. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying that it got to a point where I just, I didn't feel like I was useful anymore.
With Mazzacane out of the picture, one of Mary's predictions has already come true. 5 years have passed since the murder, and the case still hasn't been solved. In fact, it would be another 6 years before there's a break in the case. A woman calls the police and claims that her husband threatened to do the same thing to her as he'd done to Penny Serra. The man is arrested and charged with Penny's murder. Is this the man Mary Downey saw in her visions? Will John Serra finally get justice? Because although it's been 11 years, the statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder. After one of the largest homicide investigations in New Haven history, a suspect is about to go on trial for the murder of Penny Serra. Before a word of evidence is heard, the retired detective who spent 5 years working the case has reached his own verdict.
I just knew he was not guilty. We had already checked this guy out 3 or 4 years ago. He had an alibi, he was working that day.
Mazzacane was right. On the eve of the trial, the prosecutor made a startling announcement. The suspect's blood was type A. The blood found at the crime scene was type O. Case dismissed. The man was fully exonerated, but the damage was done. His life would never be the same. It's only in movies the wrongly accused walk away smiling. Once again, the Penny Serra case goes cold. Years pass. Fortunately for this case and many others, in the early 90s, the landscape of police work in America would change forever with the creation of a computerized fingerprint database. One of the first prints uploaded onto the new system is from the box of tissues found in Penny Serra's car. Because of the backlog with the new system, it took 3 years to find a match. The guy's name, Grant. First name, Edward.
And I saw a uniform with a name tag with the letter E on it.
The letter E for Edward, exactly as Mary predicted, and at one point Grant had fixed cars for a living, another prediction of Mary's that proved absolutely accurate. Grant had been arrested in 1994 on a domestic violence rap. He had no prior convictions.
The person was somebody that would just slip, very ordinary, and slip right through the cracks.
Once again, Mary was spot on. For all intents and purposes, Grant was a clean, living, nondescript citizen.
Don't give up because blood would tell.
Mary Downey couldn't possibly have known what blood would tell meant, because when she predicted it more than 20 years ago, forensic DNA technology didn't exist. And it transpired that on the day of the murder, Grant had been to the nearby Veterans Administration Hospital to receive treatment for an old head injury.
This guy's got 3 plates in his head. 30 years later, you find she was getting his headache. She was telling me this almost 30 years earlier.
All of psychic Mary Downey's predictions had hit the mark. But what about the vision of water? The one clue both Matsukane and Mary dismissed. It turns out Grant lived in the nearby town of Waterbury. As for Grant, the fingerprint match allowed police to get a blood sample so that his DNA could be compared to blood found at the crime scene. It, too, was a positive match.
I just couldn't believe it, but I could believe it. And I knew it was him.
On Thursday, June 24th, 1999, almost 26 years after the crime was committed, Edward R. Grant was arrested for the murder of Penny Serra. In September 2002, he was sentenced to serve 20 years in prison. He won't be eligible for parole until he's 80 years old. Up to the end, Grant maintained his innocence, so we may never know why Penny Serra was murdered. The tragic irony of this story is that Penny's father, John Serra, a man who had devoted more than 20 years of his life trying to help bring the killer to justice, died just 8 months before Grant was caught.
I could see John going to heaven and saying to God, "Now listen, God, it's been all these years, and Mary said that this was going to be solved, so I want it solved." And God said, "Okay, we'll take care of it." And that's what happened.
They say truth is stranger than fiction. And in this case, the truth was very, very strange.